Net neutrality is the idea, principle, or requirement that internet service providers should or must treat all internet data as the same, regardless of its kind, source, or destination. So what exactly does that mean? Well, let's pretend you're the founder of your own startup called Captain Games. You've put your heart and soul into this company, and you believe you have built the best game you possibly can. You put your game on your website and do some advertising, but very quickly, you notice no one is visiting your site. That's because you didn't give internet service providers, or the gatekeepers of the internet, enough money to allow traffic to your website. They've put you on the lowest priority list. And to aggravate the situation even more, the tech giants like YouTube, Netflix, Twitter, etc. are all thriving with millions of visits per day because they can afford it, because they've been put on the highest priority list. But that's not the internet we were promised. We were promised an internet that would foster innovation, spark creativity, and embrace freedom. Nobody would want regulations that would turn ISPs into strict gatekeepers, making special deals with select companies and inhibiting new competition, innovation, and expression. Even the inventor of what is now the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee, when asked if he advocated net neutrality, responded by saying, "Yes, it's been really important, and it is very important now. We should fight for it whenever it's threatened." And unsurprisingly, legislation might be the most destructive force against net neutrality. In March of 2017, Senate Joint Resolution 34 was born, a bill that was drafted to repeal Chapter 8 of Title V submitted by the Federal Communications Commission relating to, quote, protecting the privacy of customers of broadband and other telecommunications services, end quote. In layman's terms, this bill would allow your internet service provider to sell your internet traffic history to the highest bidder, allowing the buyer to potentially manipulate your internet traffic with techniques such as ad injections and search redirections. The bill also says that ISPs are no longer required to inform you of data breaches, so in the event that your data is compromised unintentionally, it's entirely possible you'll never hear about it. This is just one of many attempts to chip away at net neutrality so that corporations can generate a larger profit. Oh, and as of April 3rd, 2017, this has already been signed into law.
So first off, net neutrality is, as we know, something that keeps your searches and everything free, and anything that you want to search on the internet is to your own discretion. How would you feel if that right was taken away from you?
Personally, I would feel like my privacy has been invaded, but at the same time, there is an understanding that what you do search is not always private, and that it can be found out, and that it can be exploited in some way, shape, and form.
All right, and what about net neutrality specifically do you think we take for granted as a society?
I think we automatically assume that what we search cannot be found back up again. So in other words, if I were to make a search on horses and maybe farm animals, that later on no one knows that I've searched for that because my internet is my own private thing. And we generally think that because we think of internet as a personal object, sort of like how we have a personal right to our car. No one's allowed to search our car without a warrant or something like that. So we think of internet in a very similar way, but sometimes we're not always aware of the fact that internet can be exploited a little bit more easily than can your physical car.
All right, and one last question. Do you believe that internet service providers should have the authority to take away said privileges?
I believe so. And I would believe that only in the case where they suspect criminal activity. So, for example, Patriot Act, where the government does have the right to spy on you, is meant to be as an assistance or deterrent to criminal/terrorist activities. And I think, in a sense, internet service providers should work closely to prevent that from happening. So if someone is found maybe searching how to look up a bomb or how to, commit acts of terrorism, then at that point, I feel like their internet privacy is no longer private at that point. It does need to be made public.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Mr.
Do you think that people take the internet for granted?
Yeah, I think people take the internet for granted a lot of times. It's a great place where people all over the world can share information whenever they want and in any format they wish to. So I think in a lot of times people do take granted for that.
All right. And do you believe that internet service providers should be allowed to slow down or restrict access to these websites?
I do not believe they should be able to have that option, because what makes the internet so great is that people have free access everywhere to it, and people can have their access limited to it. And in the case that their access is limited to it, then that restrains their freedoms.
Even if the ISPs are responsible for bringing that service to you?
In what way?
Do you believe that because they're the ones providing the service, that they should be able to do whatever they want with that service?
No, because at this point in time, I think that the internet has become like such an integral part of our society that it's more or less of a right to have access to information.
What about emergency situations like the Patriot Act? Do you believe that internet service providers should be able to give out your information then?
That's a tough question, because obviously a lot of times, you want to do the right thing and like help save people's life potentially, but I think it's a double-edged sword in a lot of times, because while you think you might be helping, it could be a slippery slope down towards governments taking advantage of those policies and looking into people's information when they shouldn't be.
Internet providers have the ability to control what a user can and can't connect to while using the internet. In this short clip from Warriors of the Net, the process that determines if websites are allowed to be accessed is explained.
The proxy opens the packet and looks for the web address, or URL. Depending upon whether the address is acceptable, the packet is sent on to the internet. There are, however, some addresses which do not meet with the approval of the proxy, that is to say, corporate or management guidelines. These are summarily dealt with.
This is commonly used in public Wi-Fi zones such as schools and businesses to lock access to specific websites. While understandable in those cases to keep users focused and blocked from unwanted websites, this technique in the hands of internet service providers responsible for giving Wi-Fi to users at home is a violation of net neutrality. The new chairman of the Federal Communications Commission's Ajit Pai is considered by many to be the current greatest threat to net neutrality. Pai's goal is to modify the current rules of net neutrality in order to allow internet service providers to have more control over what services their users can and can't access. If he reaches his goal, it means that all of the problems associated with not having net neutrality will most likely become a reality.
I just want to pose a hypothetical to you.
Sure.
Let's just say Comcast created a new TV series, and it just so happened that that competed with a Netflix series very similarly. If these rules go away, how is there not an incredible incentive for Comcast to slow Netflix down coming into my house and make their video, the Comcast video, very robust?
So under that hypothetical, one of the things that's important to remember is that it is a hypothetical, that we don't see evidence of that happening in the marketplace on a widespread level.
However, that is not the case. This hypothetical situation became a reality. In 2014, Verizon was caught red-handed throttling speeds to Netflix, and the sad part is, Netflix was even paying Verizon to stop the throttling. Yet they still continued. Verizon argued that the problem was on Netflix's end. Verizon claims that Netflix chose to attempt to deliver its traffic through a few third-party transfer providers with limited capacity over connections, but this claim was retorted by third-party provider Level 3, who noted that the peering between Verizon and Level 3 is literally accomplished by connecting 4 10G ports between a pair of routers.
That I'm streaming is a Netflix test video which shows you the bitrate that it's streaming at, for which I'm supposed to be getting 75 megabits per second. And this is fiber optic, state-of-the-art stuff, right? But what happens when you go through a VPN and don't connect directly? Now I'm connected, and I'm going to restart, just reload this particular screen, same spot. And you can see it starts almost immediately. It's now up at 1750. 2350.
This isn't a first-time offense either, for Verizon or other companies. In 2007, Verizon blocked text messages from an abortion's right group, the NARL, who took advantage of supporters' abilities to donate via text message. This move created an uproar. Organizations even against abortion criticized Verizon for restricting these certain political views. And Verizon isn't the only offender either. Other companies like Comcast and AT&T are also guilty of breaking these regulations. Pi states that these events occurring would only be a hypothetical situation. Yet, if unregulated, those companies clearly and certainly have made those hypothetical situations a reality. Currently, these companies are under Title II, which treat ISPs as utility companies and gives the FCC the legal grounds to pass a robust set of rules that ban ISPs from blocking, throttling, or from selling fast lanes to whoever wants to pay for the speediest access to the consumer. With Title II, the second subsection, 202, clearly states that common carriers can't make an unjust or unreasonable discrimination in charges, practices, classifications, regulations, facilities, or services. From this language, it's a bit easier to see how Title II connects to net neutrality.
Back in 2010, the FCC wrote net neutrality rules governing ISPs, which at the time were regulated under the less strict Title I. And the companies found those net neutrality rules inconvenient. In fact, Verizon successfully sued the FCC, arguing that it didn't have enough authority to enforce those rules. And the court ruled that if the FCC did want strong, enforceable net neutrality, their best option would be to reclassify ISPs under Title II, which allows for much stronger oversight. So the FCC did that, and the fact they did was huge.
But Pi argues that these regulations prevent market growth and promote stagnation. He proposes that high-speed internet services should no longer be treated as a public utility with strict rules. As it is now, the move would, in effect, largely leave the industry to police itself. This will cause those hypothetical situations to not be so hypothetical and threaten our current climate of a free and open internet.
As highlighted in the article by Aaron Sandkin, net neutrality has been broken in numerous cases by several different internet service providers. The cases discovered directly contrast Pi's statement that we don't see evidence of net neutrality being broken. These examples show that companies are willing to break net neutrality and the law to further their own agenda. This just puts up the question, to what degree would they manipulate net neutrality if many of its regulations were removed? Currently, net neutrality doesn't have enough publicity. This allows companies to be able to get away with manipulating it, as well as for laws concerning it to be changed without much challenge. FCC Commissioner Mignon Clyburn is a prominent figure advocating for net neutrality. Clyburn states that net neutrality is doomed if we're silent, and the only way to protect it is to weigh in on the problem. Net neutrality shouldn't be a privilege that companies can choose to give to us, but a right that we should always have. We cannot allow companies to dominate our freedom of the internet in any way they choose just to make more profits. The internet should be a place of freedom for everybody, not a market for competition.
Zane, stop.